Hello, my name is Alec Bracamontes, and this is Part D of Newton's second law group project. Now, the relevance of this new problem directly relates to Newton's second law because it involves calculating the acceleration of an object by combining force, mass, and friction. Earlier parts of this project described how Newton and later scientists measured motion with simple tools, but this problem applies law in a more modern, realistic scenario using actual numerical solving. The problem requires multiple mathematical steps, consistent units, and interpretation of physical forces acting on the object. By solving it, we can continue the same scientific process used historically. Now, the benefits of this problem. Understanding this unique problem that I created helps students see how Newton's second law applies to real-life motion, not just hypothetical situations. It shows how multiple forces like applied force, friction, and an additional pulling force must all be combined to determine the actual acceleration of an object. Solving this problem will gain you skills in breaking down a system of forces into components, calculating friction using the normal force, and a coefficient. Using Newton's second law to link net force and acceleration, and working step by step instead of guessing. Other problems can be done afterwards, like boxes on ramps with friction, objects pulled by multiple different forces in multiple different directions, and motion and engineering and warehouse automation systems. Now, the development of this problem. This brand new problem that I developed from scratch, I had to combine a few force components like applied force, friction, and pulling force to create a situation that students might be able to actually see in a workplace, warehouse, or any engineering environment. Instead of just using, unrealistic frictionless surface, the problem uses real physical values such as a coefficient of friction, mass, and distance. The problem isn't too simple because it requires calculating friction from the normal force, and you have to combine multiple forces to find the net force. However, it's not too difficult because you only need to use just basic algebra and as well as just F equals ma. That's all you need. You don't need nothing fancy like calculus or vectors or multiple step physics models. Some difficulties that I faced creating this problem involved, not trying to use a plug and play type of step, with formulas specifically, making it multiple choice, obviously, as well as not trying to use unrealistic numbers, maybe some smaller, realistic numbers. Now, the uniqueness of this problem, most of the problems that I found online were pretty straightforward and simple. Like I mentioned before, they were mostly just plug and play. But this new problem that I created is much more realistic and meaningful. It includes the three interacting forces, an applied push, friction from the floor, and a pulling force from a rope. And then these forces don't just cancel or solve in just one simple step. You got to think carefully throughout the entire procedure so that you can find the net force. Now, to make it more unique, I added specific information like a real-world setting, a realistic coefficient of friction, and a force coming from a different direction, not just straightforward. This goes above and beyond common problems because it requires multiple steps, not just plugging in numbers into an equation. Students must combine and compute forces before calculating the acceleration, and it shows how Newton's second law applies to real objects moved by real people. Now, a visual for the problem, I provided a graph of the force versus the acceleration for the 12 kilogram crate. Now, the graph shows a linear relationship between the net force and the acceleration, which is consistent with F equals ma. This direct proportion confirms that acceleration depends linearly on the applied net force when mass is constant. As force doubles, so is acceleration. Now, the formulas used for this specific problem, we have the Newton's second law, obviously. We have the net force definition, and we also have the formula for friction. Variables and constants that were used, we have the mass of the crate.